Hi, Bentley.
Hey, Marc-Antoine.
How are you?
I'm doing okay. What you?
I just was, let's see if anybody is coming. I just was at a conference by Sowa and Majumdar, Arun Majumdar, and they have this AI company called, let me remember the name of the company. Oof, too much. Anyway, they're working on the system that does advanced symbolic, and they have full recursivity. Thank you very much. And they combine it with graph embedding and language embedding and full reasoning. It's pretty advanced. It's very, very impressive. Probably one of the most impressive logic systems I've seen in a long while. So that was fun. They're using something they call that is common logic, which is an ISO standard, which enables full higher order logic. The company is called Permian.ai. And yeah, God, I wish we could be building on that. Of course, it's not open source, but it's pretty advanced technology. They've created their own virtual machine. They have a kind of higher order logic prologue that they developed. Very, very cool stuff. So that's what I was doing earlier today. Thinking a lot about how to do a basic version of recursive logic in a database, and thinking about many models, and that's maybe worth getting into, but maybe others should report.
I've been playing around with other stuff, so I haven't been focusing much on CDL stuff. Michael's helping me categorize fill out a debate on heart disease and keto diet, way of eating. So moving forward on that. And I need to buckle down and work on the video presentation of it. So
okay,
that's what I need to do.
Jack joined us. He was with me at the Permian Sowa Majumdar meeting. I just gave the big overview. Maybe you want to get into detail.
My head is still spinning. I don't know how much detail I could get down to. I think those guys, I've always known Arun Majumdar is way out in front of just about everybody else, and today he showed it again.
Yeah. These guys are doing the real thing. Joel, Michael.
I've been working on Ameliorate. So I've just been working on setting up a backend for it, which is just, I haven't made a lot of progress on the actual functionality. Just learning how to use like TRPC and React Query and I don't know, I guess some fun backend technologies. I haven't really set up a backend from scratch before, so I'm learning a decent amount, and user authentication and stuff as well.
Which backend are you using?
Well, so I have a Next.js front end, and I'm making, right now I'm using Next.js backend as well, but I also want to like make an equivalent. I'm going to make an equivalent branch with Nest.js as the backend, just to.
What's the database?
Postgres.
Okay.
I was gonna do a graph backend database, but I feel like, I don't know, the actual hosting services for a graph database are like not, they're like very targeted towards enterprise usage of it. So I figured I don't know. I think a relational database can, like, it just won't be as like nice to query the nodes, but I think it'll get the job done, at least for the near future. And if I don't plan for like the node for like analysis across like all nodes, across all topics to be like a thing in the near future. So I think that's when the graph querying would be like more beneficial. And once we get there, I'm sure it's migratable to like switch from it'd probably be annoying to migrate, but doable. Just a shortcut to take right now. I don't know.
It's not data migration is actually trivial. The problem is all your code logic and queries. That's the hassle. I mean, thinking about that a lot, right? I have done everything in Postgres, and now I'm beginning to hit the limits. It's like, okay, what do I do next? Do I implement graph logic in Postgres, which is a possibility, but I'll still have to rewrite my queries.
Are you? Oh, wait. So, are you talking about? So for Idealoom, you said that the tree is like actually a graph.
I'm not speaking about Idealoom per se. I'm been thinking about how do I want to do the canonical database, the canonical debate, the CDL, or my system, hyperknowledge, right? I mean, the whole idea of hyperknowledge is Idealoom had a graph underneath, but a tree on the front end, which was grossly inadequate. But I realized graph was not enough. I want hypergraph, recursive hypergraph, because I want to talk about statements. And what's the right database structure for that? And basically, there's 2 or 3 classes of answers if you're thinking recursive hypergraph. Well, Tim last time told us that Arango allows edges to edges. I don't know how optimal that is, but it can do it, which I found extremely interesting. So that's a scenario. But more generally, there's kind of 2 big ideas. Either when you have a hyperedge, that is something pointing to many nodes, or maybe to other hyperedges. But it's multi-pronged, right? It could have just source target like a normal arrow, or it could have multiple source, multiple target, type targets. Like I'm thinking frames, right? I'm thinking, think of verb. A verb is a hyperedge. John gave the ball to Mary. There's 3 edges there. Gave points to John, to Mary, and to the ball. It's a whole. So you can go like, say each unit of knowledge is a dictionary, basically, key value, and the values are either literals or other objects. And the dictionary is a unit. Okay, so that's an option. And the other, and that's in a way what ArangoDB is doing. It's going, we have a document, and the document could be a JSON blob, but in particular, we're interested in the case where edges are like some of the key value pairs. Well, the value is another document. So this is very much a hyperedge. And then they can do graph queries and graph traversals on that, which is cool. The other option is to, and I like that option a lot, because let's face it, frame, I think, is a natural unit of thought at a very deep level. The second option.
Sorry, is frame just that structure of document with the?
It's more than that. It's an AI term, and it's the notion that there's a linguistic background for it. Look at Stanford FrameNet. They did a classification of linguistic units. Like when I said a verb has, for example, agent, patient, like, so we know subject object from grammar, but really we're talking about agent, patient. There are roles, and those have been cataloged, and the FrameNet catalog, and there's been ontology representations of that. And I think when we're speaking about what people are saying, we're speaking about frames. And frames in AI also have the idea of Often they have default values or typicality values or kind of rules, consistency rules for various attributes. Like if it's a frame of this type, you know that there's this kind of meta knowledge about the frame. So there's a schema language for each frame type. So that's one option, and I believe in it a lot. And the other option is to go totally atomic, and that's the RDF route, where every subject key value triple is a unit. And on the one hand, this gives you much finer addressability. And that's what RDF does. And there's a whole tooling and infrastructure to use that. On the other hand, your database is a soup. That means you have no locality, which is a bit of a problem in terms of performance. But RDF gives you high-level tooling. And if you're dealing with and then you get rule-based systems and Shackle is nice because it allows you to not follow your schema, but it will tell you when you've diverged from your schema, which is much better than constraining you to follow the schema. But you can store anything because they're just subject, predicate, object, but very tiny units. It's not the full frame. So each key value pair of the frame would be a different thing. So these are the kind of two models. And it makes sense that transaction-wise, you want to commit a frame at a time, or even a set of frames at a time, because there's a set of frames that makes sense as a whole, right? So you're committing a transaction, which is a micrograph. And so the question is, do we have these micro assertion, RDF? Do we have a frame at a time? And then what happens if I disagree with this element of the frame? And I cannot really name it because the unit of naming is the frame, not the key. This key of this frame, and maybe with this value, because maybe this key comes multiple times with different values, and because that's one way to do collections in RDF. For example, in RDF, it's very classic to have the title of a resource have multiple values with different languages when you have translation. In Wikidata, that's what happens. Each, the key, the title or the name of a concept in Wikidata has multiple values because each with different language code and sometimes alternates. Now, if you go with the frame, so you gain performance because things are kind of co-located, you gain transactionality, but you lose micro-addressability. And then the question is, what happens when something changes or people disagree or there's an edit? Is it, and this is where my thinking is a bit divergent, it's that, well, for me, each asserted frame is an immutable blob. And when you're editing, what you're doing is you're replacing one immutable by another, and you're actually declaring that you're replacing an immutable by another. And that itself is an assertion. But you still want to be able to say, okay, given this immutable, which is a point in time thing that happened, what happens since? And that's kind of how I'm designing hyperknowledge and trying to create the database around that. Because it gives me both the history time travel thing of functional programming and the frame nature of things. But how would I represent that in a database, and what are the operations and blah, blah, blah? Because I'm not building a full database from scratch. I'm modeling it over database constructs, such as probably still Postgres, because I know it inside out and it's so polyvalent. Or maybe also I will have a look at Arango and friends.
Right.
The one thing that I've been thinking about a lot is if I have a state, a mutable state for a given concept, and the immutable would be kind of more in the history, but a mutable state, it's a blob. It can have all these values. And then you say, okay, now I want to see it as this schema. And this schema just extracts a certain subset of the blob to say, well, I'm now treating it as this schema. And this extraction could be a materialized view, say in Postgres, because I'm seeing it as this, and then you can index on that, and you can do operations in a materialized view for performance purpose. But the big boys in database, in knowledge graphs are, no, it's all vectors, it's all matrix, it's all algebra. They're translating all of this as algebra operations, big matrix operations, because GPU wins. So very fascinating.
But if you do it, I guess, if you do that, is it like, it's not, is it still like queryable without the like natural language processing part of it? Like, you know, with the
okay, there's many different ways it's being done. Like you can have your whole graph as a sparse matrix and do sparse matrix operations. And then somehow optimize sparse matrix operations with a GPU. Jack is not decided. We had other things to do. Another way you can do it is reduce the dimensionality and do a kind of graph embedding. And there's many techniques for how do you embed a graph in a lower dimensionality, probably with a neural network training, yada. And then what are you putting as the input of the network? And then people are playing with many possibilities. Like one thing people are doing a lot is taking random walks in the knowledge graph and then putting that's training data. And saying, well, that's what's happening in this graph. Take a sample of what's happening in this graph and sample of structure and make those random walks into vectors that you input, and then and then you can ask the neural network, can you predict new links, new nodes, and so on. Which is what would be the path between this node and this one, these kinds of things. And that gives you naturally an embedding for paths, I guess. But in a way, that becomes an embedding of the graph. They call them graph embeddings. And some people are experimenting with combining, like simply concatenate. You have the text embedding of a node, you have the graph embedding of its neighborhood as a set of random walks from that node. And that becomes a vector representation of the node, and train your network on that, and you get a kind of weird hybrid from there. Very fascinating work.
And then you would, I guess, like not only get a feel for what the node is, but its relations with other things.
Yeah.
Just as an extra detailing.
Yeah. But
Pretty interesting.
I want to be very clear. I haven't played with any of that. This is stuff I'm hearing. I've played a lot with graph representation, but the feeding into a neural network, I don't have personal experience with. But I've been looking at those libraries and seeing, is that something I want to get into, and up to what point? But at a more basic level, what's the right representation? So as I said, very easy to put blob per concept in the table, separate the events, or go full events in the database and reconstruct the current state on demand, but that's costly. So probably the former, or go totally atomic RDF based, which has its own qualities.
I have a hypothetical for you. If you wanted to, depending on what node you are in a graph, like let's say you're in the canonical debate and you're at some claim.
Yep.
If you want to represent all of the child claims to whatever level, like 4 or 5, whatever level you choose, and each child claim is rephrased based on whatever node you're at, so it makes sense to that node. If that makes sense, what kind of database structure would you use for that? Because you'd have like a lot of different variations of each claim, depending on how many claims they're connected to and how many nodes they have. So
great question. I'm like in
Well-
in a lot of CDL discussions, we've spoken about standalone claims. That is, claims that can be understood without context. If you're speaking about dependent expressions, well, obviously, storage varies, and I would think you'd probably want to encode a lot of that in the link for at least the one context. Like if you're
Into
just
what, sorry?
into the link for at least the depth one context. Like if you're just saying from this node to this node, this would be explaining this node in context of this node. That's a link. So you could encode stuff into link. If you're going for paths, and that's very interesting. I haven't thought about that because, well, because I wasn't there yet.
It seems like way too much to store. Like you'd have, like, that seems like where you'd have the standalone claims, and then you could like, when you select one, you could like recalculate kind of like what a standalone claim would.
It's certainly something I'd want to generate more than store. It's something I'd never considered. I said because I'm not there, but also because I don't see anybody inputting that data. I mean, if it's about getting it generated by LLM, then maybe on demand. But again, for depth two, for depth one, I would do it.
If the costs are low enough, like if they get low enough LLM, maybe, but I'm thinking how much does that scale if you want this, like planetary wide, say, and the use case is for displaying, for the user to be able to grok, especially in domains they're not familiar with. If you have standalone claim, okay, yeah.
My feeling is that the right unit is neither the node, the link, or the path, but it's the neighborhood. So I've often spoken about curated maps. Here's a map. Here's a neighborhood of stuff I want to understand as a whole. And then I'd want a textual overview of that neighborhood. And that, okay, first, as a curate, if it's a curated map, it means it's, you know, hand curated, generated once. So I would generate it once at every edit and store that. But
for
it's
just the neighborhood, you mean?
For a neighborhood, because the neighborhood is then something that is, it's not every possible neighborhood. It's a neighborhood that somebody has deemed significant and worth thinking about and worth teaching about, right? That's what I mean by curated map. Somebody said, this is worth understanding as a whole. So let's take that neighborhood, give it a name. It's this map of this neighborhood. And hey, let's generate an explanation of that. And I think that's really useful. And yeah, sure, I'd store that because it's part of the map properties.
In that case, I guess would maybe like rephrasings of nodes within context just be within the context of the neighborhood and not within like each other node, you know, of that.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems reasonable and like a efficient, I guess, way to.
And if you're going outside the neighborhood, and this is where it gets really interesting, if you have, okay, I've understood this much, and maybe that was the bird's eye view, and now I want to dig deeper into this part. And now what you'd want is the map, a kind of Bayesian operator saying, explain this connected neighborhood, given that I've understood this one. This, I would probably tend to do on demand. It's a good one. I've no clue. I haven't thought about that much.
I'm wondering if also one of the needs of that is to replace repeated phrases. Because if everything, you know, if you have 5 child nodes and they're all saying global climate change and blah, 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 when you would just say it, right? And people know what it is, then it might be interesting. I wonder if some NLP could identify repeated phrases and boil them down into a concept, or just have the option of, you know, a user in this neighborhood or whatever in this display, you know, choosing a phrase and just say replace all those with its. So it's just kind of a concept shortening Might be one way to do it.
Absolutely true. In real life, what I expect will happen is that you'll have not so much the node as a phrase in the first place, but the node as a frame. And you'll want to say, okay, let's transform the frame into language, given that the frame is already kind of linguistic. And then if you've come at it from a previous path and you know that means, oh, this term's being used, this term's being used, this term's being used, then those can be references, pronouns or shorthands or something. Because when you're generating the phrase from the frame, you can do it with path knowledge.
Yeah, in the short term for reason score, I'm just putting it in local language. But in the long term,
Because
want them
it's
more
not a
generic.
global, it's not a global, it's not based on a global node. It's not a view of,
Yeah,
a, global,
I mean,
of a global network.
the data storage is designed to handle a global network, and you can share things within a map, but yeah, it's not to that yet. So I was going the other way and erring on this side of comprehension over reusability.
Right. It's
temporary.
perfectly natural. We're designing local first, and I understand that. I'm trying to think of global, and it's difficult. I mean, I keep fighting, oh no, this is a local first assumption.
So also, like, one of the data structures I was having was there's and I think Tim was also kind of having this, is that, yeah, when you do a join between two nodes, there's a phrasing of the child in the join, which is, I guess, one of the situations Marc-Antoine was suggesting. So you
When I
have the
said
longer
you can
phrase.
put it in the link.
Like, well, can you
Well,
give an
that's what I
example?
meant. Link, join. I'm using those.
For me, link is materialized and join is computed on demand. No?
I'm not sure
That
what
is
you
an
mean by
acceptable
join, I guess.
distinction.
What?
In the data structure of this ID to this ID, there's a rephrasing the child text box that would have a rephrasing of that child in that context of its parent.
So in the join table, I guess.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I said when I said in the link. Yeah, sounds exactly right.
Hmm.
Yep. Makes perfect sense to me.
But
That's
would
one
that
way to
only-
handle it, but that only goes down a few levels
Yeah,
before
only
it
one.
falls apart. Now, on reason score, some of the things I was having is I was in the join or the link, I was saying this node is a child of this one within the context of this ancestor node. Because there are times where it's like, well, if I go into another, this node could be joined up, but in its context, it doesn't actually apply if it's in a different neighborhood, is kind of what we're saying. But I was doing so I had like an ancestor ID and said, if that ancestor is not in the chain, then it's not joined in this case.
Ow.
Yeah.
Ow.
It was needed for some specific situations, but once again, that was also, well, that's because I'm doing scoring and the position is important, which you don't want in the CDL. So it was a very unique use case.
I'm really curious about what is it that in this context the link really doesn't make sense, or is it that you don't want to display it for reasons? Because it seems to me this would be done with a curated map, like saying a curated map has this node, this node, this node, this node, and maybe even a sub-selection of links between those nodes.
Yeah, I would imagine this is actually a way of documenting the curated map. So yeah, it's a curated map.
Which sounds,
it's just the way I'm materializing in the database is saying I'm reusing nodes. So I'm just saying, hey, this only works within the context of this.
IDLoom has explicit curated maps, subgraphs. Again, hardly visible in the UX, but the database has this notion. Here's a name graph. here's a link from name graph to this node, to this node, to this node, to this link, to this link, to this link. So that, this is what is in this curated view, no more, no less, including this is how I time travel. Because when I send a synthesis of messages, it's the synthesis at that time. And I still have it as objects, which means if the objects keep evolving, I've kept the snapshot of at that time of that synthesis so that I can recreate the synthesis, redisplay the old synthesis with the nodes as they were then.
Yeah, so is there a concept of reusing that? I forgot the phrase now.
The curated map.
Yeah, that curated map within other maps. No.
Not at this point, but it should be totally doable.
Yeah, so that's kind of the way I was handling it. I was putting kind of a scope on that could span multiple generations of nodes in the graph. Of course, that's because it's also because I'm thinking top down as a tree as opposed to a full graph. So maybe that doesn't work in an actual lattice. Yeah, it doesn't work in a lattice at all. So
or in a graph.
it
Yeah.
probably breaks in other things. So yeah, it was a very specific use case that probably doesn't apply. But yeah, that's where you're gonna, you're gonna need like graph separations and then ways to recombine them and no references. If you want to get later on when we get more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else working on anything? Sure.
Just working on that discourse graph or argument map, my keto one. And it's really interesting to do it as from a user perspective, to note what kind of challenges I come across and try and write those down and say, okay, well, doing research, here's what would speed this up or make it more beneficial in whatever way. Same with the discourse graph itself as a plugin or as a program, and specifically the canvas, using a canvas and coming across the issues that I hadn't considered is pretty interesting. So yeah, just trying to see the state of what this looks like in practice, but very localized. So
it's interesting that and Michael and I working together, I ran across a kind of a problem with me using the word claim and reason score is that when I think of a claim, I'm thinking of a logical claim disconnected from any phrase anyone said or any body, right? So it's more like a claim of reality, of evidence or something like that. But when you say claim, it kind of implies this person said this. This is a claim this X person said. So I don't know if there's a different or better word to use to distinguish that, because we're writing this graph. So he was talking discourse graph, but actually the reason score graph, the sentences we're going to end up using, no one has ever said before, or some of them. And we want to link to the way people phrased it before, but through the progressive formalization, they're looking very different. So I don't know if there's a better word for what my nodes are in reason score than claim. But
I guess I always just thought of claim like in the simplest manner of just something that can be supported and critiqued, whether or not it's like a direct quote or
yeah, maybe it's not an important distinction.
No, I'm curious. Sorry, go through it again. I did miss it, and I apologize. I missed a key moment of your.
That the actual sentences at reason score probably won't resemble any way anyone's ever said that claim outside of reason score. The rarefied, the
yeah, of course,
formalized phrase is markedly different. So a lot of times I had Michael going through and looking at all these podcasts and stuff and pulling out the claims, but it turns out even though all that work is valuable, none of that actually ends up, well, very little of it ends up in the final product. We may link out to it. And so there was this kind of disconnect between and I think I've had this with other researchers where they do all this work pulling out all these claims. It's like, okay, now throw that all away. What were they trying to say badly? And what's the proper logical hierarchy to put these claims in as far as evidence and weight? And yet it's even further that from the way people talk about it than I even thought.
Right.
it was.
The vocabulary we started to evolve, if you'll remember, at some point in CDL was standalone claims for those self-contained sentences.
Yeah.
And I think what we're doing, and I don't know if that is something we all agreed on, but I think what we're doing is interpreting quotes as standalone claims. And it's an interpretation process. That means somebody could take the same quote and come up with a different standalone claim, which is valid. It's
Yeah. And it's even multiple quotes come into
Yep.
one claim, right?
It's a many-to-many.
Because a lot of people say it in several different ways.
Correct.
And no one has said it this specific way, but that's really that's what they meant. That's if they'd really sat down and thought about it, they probably would have said it this way.
That's your interpretation.
According
of
to
the
us,
thing.
yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah.
It's not.
Or
I'm not saying that
Let
you
me put
have
it this
to.
way: if they were putting it into a logical framework,
Like trying to remove
divorce
the
of-
bias from it, you
of-
mean?
well, I mean, just not like, well, so when you say a claim is strong, some claims are strong because they trigger an emotional and a change in a human, and some claims are strong because they can be logically defended and there isn't evidence against them. So, all people should do this is a very powerful claim from an emotional standpoint, but if I find one example, it's broken. So that's very weak from a logical standpoint. So people are often talking, they're not expressing themselves, they're not thinking through a logical.
That's absolutely correct. But what I'm saying is another researcher might come across the same quote and extract a different logical formulation out of it. And that's how it is and how it should be. I mean, I'm saying you do a work of inferring the likely.
I mean, hopefully we're
logical
extracting all
representation.
the possible logical. I mean, we could miss some, but it's not like I'm saying here's a quote and here's what they said. I'm saying here's a quote and here's the 5 things they could have meant by that, which is what Jamie does.
Yeah,
right?
that's
and
the
then, but we're gonna
claims. Yeah,
choose
that's what
to
Jamie
pick
calls
one of
inferred
these
claims.
because it's the most valuable in the context of the debate, and we're gonna de-emphasize all the others.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is maybe the list is longer than 5, and then you do a selection. And again, you have to do that. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying be aware that this is what you're doing, and that means there's a many relationship between quotes and standalone claims. Which is what you were saying.
Right. But also, I guess what I'm saying is that there's no direct relationship. So I guess what I'm saying is that we can put in claims that is inspired by a quote that the person who said it had no intent of saying that.
Entirely possible.
Right. So they're like talking about, well, ApoB, increases your chance. ApoB is atherogenic, right? So the technical thing about cardiovascular disease. They can say that, and we think, and that comes up. Oh, well, that kind of begs the question: what else is atherogenic? So, I'm just saying that we might keep loose links and stuff like that, but there's this problem where people are looking at this and they think that this claim has anything to do with what people said. It's like, no, we're trying to get to reality. We're not trying to get to the discourse. Does that make sense?
That seems like where the like IBIS framework of like being able to have anybody like question, like have a question pointing to some other claim, like maybe they claim that this is better or whatever you said, this is like effective or something. And then the question comes like, what else is effective? And then that like could result in, I mean, that, I don't know if that goes well with the like tree format, because then any answers to that would not be like on the same level as what the question was pointing to.
Yeah,
but-
I mean, in effect, that's what we're doing. Yeah, it's just not built into in the system. That's all kind of the meta process.
But what I'm hearing is that you have quotes, you have your standalone claims that you're building, and maybe you're worried about the distinction between, this claim, this quote seems to really contain this claim, as opposed to this quote and vaguely inspired this claim, because that's a real distinction. And it's something you probably want to store.
Although I'm kind of leaning towards all the quotes are inspiring claims, and it's just resetting people's expectations that just because it's in the system doesn't mean anyone actually made this claim. And if a claim was inspired by that, we're not saying that the person who made that statement believes
would
it.
stand by the claim.
Would stand by, because there was some
Or would
times
stand by the
where-
statement. Yes, it could have been a straw
people would
man
also like ask a
context.
question. So they're not making the claim, but when we put it in the system, we'd put it in as a claim.
Absolutely
But we don't
correct.
want to say, oh, this person's an idiot because they made this claim. It's because they
No.
were just going, oh, well,
Or they were making a straw man. It's, the truth value of the quote, and a fortiori the derived claims in the original text is a non-trivial. The presence does not imply endorsement. And there I'm totally with you. And yeah, I think it is useful to distinguish. I think this statement contains this claim, as opposed to this statement made us think of this claim. That's not really, it's in the case where you would actually want to say, hey, this claim is made by a real person. Here's a quote. And then, yes, you're right. You would even want to distinguish this was stated by someone from this was endorsed by someone. Because you're right, there is a distinction.
yeah. And I was thinking about, and this is eventually going to come out in the video. So the video is going to be a mock debate with people using evidence and reason score. So I would like to show clips of people saying things. And then, but there's probably going to be this step towards, like, you put up a video clip of someone saying something, you might say, oh, but we're going to strengthen this. We're going to strengthen this argument
Steel
logically by taking out the word all and supplying, changing it to most. So we're going to make these changes.
That's not strengthening, it's hedging.
Well,
it's more likely to be valid, but it's a weaker statement in the strictest sense of the word. It's
in one of the uses of the word weaker and stronger.
Yeah, well, fair enough. But okay, not the one used in logic, and not the one used.
Right, but used in common language. People say, oh, that's weak, although they usually mean emotionally weak, not logically weak. And when I say logically strong, I'm not saying in the term logic, in the academic use of the word logic, but in the colloquial use.
You mean less likely to be disproven?
Yeah.
More resilient, maybe, or
yeah, resilient would probably be a better, more defendable or defensible.
Yeah. But yes.
Are there any, you mentioned if they were going to say whatever quote they did, if they were actually going to use logic, this is what it would look like. Are there any logic frameworks or different types of logic frameworks or workflows that you can take, a preposition and say, actually, well, this, if I do X, Y, and Z to it, equals this new thing?
Marc-Antoine's correct in saying that that's not, I was using the wrong phrase, logical. So defendable. I don't know if there is a logic framework for that, Marc-Antoine.
I would just say, like, if there is, that could be what you call the new claim, maybe, like instead of a standalone claim, which I like, I think it's good, but it could be a this
And I am going to
framework
need to figure
type
out how to
claim.
express that in the video. Like, we're changing this because I gotta have some word to say, and defensible might be, or resilience probably good, like Mark.
Yeah, resilient is good.
But there's no framework for
Uh,
making speech resilient.
No, hedging is
hedging.
pretty easy. What you're doing is hedging. It's saying, replacing all by most. That's hedging. That's just saying, oh, I won't be proven wrong by a counterexample. Fair
Well,
enough.
yeah, right. But also a lot of times when people say all, they don't literally mean all.
That is correct.
It's a weird language quirk.
Yep.
And if you
It's-
ask them, they'll be like, well, no, I mean,
I meant most, yes. And that's absolutely correct. It's still hedging to say most instead of all. And it's more precise. I thought Michael's original question was, is there a mechanism for extracting standalone claims from generic language? To which the answer is no. We do it as humans. You can ask LLM to do it for you. It might even get it right in a lot of cases, but we don't have a formal process to do this. People have been researching that. There is a whole field of computer science called relation extraction that is about identifying their first entity identification, and then there's relation identification and trying to identify claims in text. And of course, it's been mostly used in analysis of scientific articles, because at least they're written in a more formal way and they use pretty precise statements, and they won't say all for most. And you can get, even then, the accuracy of the most elaborate relation extractor is still kind of weak, but it is getting better, of course. Now, people have been doing it with NLP techniques for a long time. And those are getting better, it must be said. The NLP, the extraction relation from NLP is getting better. It's something Jack is working on a lot, by the way. If you want to hear about relation extraction using NLP techniques, analyze the sentence and try to identify the relationship and the embedded claims. He's very active on that.
You mentioned, I watched the previous CDL meeting. You mentioned you went to that knowledge graph conference. And I think you said that extracting claims or extracting semantic triples from text, like that is done. Is that kind of what you said?
It is done, but what I'm saying is the accuracy is okay. It's getting better. It's getting much better, to be honest. But it's research. It's still research. It's being done. It's being, like, if you were looking at doing it at scale and getting as many triples as you can from a large corpus, that works. Because you don't care if you got it right from this one sentence, right? You're trying to get an overall aggregate. Let's see what I can find. And that, it's good enough. It's certainly good enough for that. And
in terms of the methods they used, was it LLMs or was it some other type of NLP stuff?
It was a classic NLP. Well, a lot of people are using Spacey nowadays for that.
Using what? Using what, sorry?
Spacey. Spacey it's a library for parsing, which uses a mix of classic grammar descent and neural network to analyze sentence structure. But there's others, of course. It's just Spacey it's very advanced, and it's got this amazing ecosystem of libraries and stuff. I love Spacey. Spacey.io. So yeah, and yeah, that is done. It's done at scale, blah, blah, blah. But as I said, accuracy on any single sentence. And if the sentence is a bit complicated and has a lot of subclauses and negations, and I've been talking to a lot of people who have been doing it at scale in scientific literature around COVID. And I looked at the code, and I'm amazed, because they're still using, sometimes they're using Spacey, and then they'll use a rule-based model to analyze the Spacey analysis that is kind of a throwback to earlier models, such as linear linear analysis, kind of regex type analysis, instead of using the tree structure that Spacey gives you. Spacey gives you a parse tree. So I started actually writing something that just, here's a rule, and can you match the parse tree against the rule? But then the rule isn't tree form, because obviously. Didn't push that far because it's a whole enterprise and I'm on other projects, but it's certainly something that can and should be done. But I think a lot of people are doing it. But if you look at relation extraction, you'll get shitload of articles. Now, once you have extracted triples, if you wanted to add hedging to triples and go from, you know, yeah, thank you for the links. The COVID, the COVID one, let's see, I don't know. COVID, no, it's they were using something called, what is it called again? I'll give you. Oh, I'll try to find it and give you the name. And Indra, I think it's called. Yeah, yes, Indra. Look for Indra, and it's got all this. It's Indra it's interesting because it's a kind of coordinating thing that uses, oh, we'll get triples from this thing and this thing and this thing. So it's a kind of orchestrating system for a lot of NLP analysis, other frameworks. I'll try to get the GitHub, but now my computer is not happy with me.
That's okay. That's not, I should be able to find it from there. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And what I said about the limitations were like, okay, Indra uses this and this uses that technique. I'm not saying Indra has this flaw. I'm saying Indra uses 30 different things, and a few of them I looked at deeper were like, what do you mean linear? My bias.
This is interesting. I need to do more research on this because my use case is basically just taking a transcript of an argument of 2 or 3 interlocutors and saying, here's what my topic is or my initial question. What are the claims that support or oppose it? And I'm wondering if these techniques would be useful or efficient enough, and open source would be nice. Or is that something you kind of prompt an LLM to do? Or do you train your own LLM specifically for that? And I don't know the answer to those questions.
I don't either. I do know that a lot of people are now doing it with LLM because, hey, it's more expensive. But let's face it, the natural language is expensive in its own way because a lot of work creating the rules, tuning the rules. These rules engine are finicky. I've worked on them a lot. You're like, oh, this case doesn't go through, so, oh, why didn't we go through this rule? Let's allow this. Oh, no, now it allows this thing that doesn't make sense, a new exception, a new test case, and blah, blah, blah. And then you start trying to, oh, there's 50 interpretations, and we want the right one to be in front, so we tune the weights, and oh, that makes this other thing go back. That was 30 years ago, and state of the art has changed. But not that much. I mean, a lot of people gave up on rule-based, and rightly so, in the sense that you don't want your humans to be doing the tuning. I believe in rule-based strongly, but what you want is the tuning to be to come from data, not from humans doing tuning. You can the humans can do the rules. I think that's still valid and valuable because we understand regularities that the machines don't. But the data should tell you, okay, this rule is more used than this one, and is more likely than this one, not 60%, which is what I've seen a lot of people do.
In that knowledge graph conference, did anyone talk about using pre-trained LLMs for
Yes.
claim extraction or triple extraction?
There were more people using the traditional NLP extraction, but a lot of people were doing hybrid kind of, well, I don't know. I saw a lot of, there's still people doing classical NLP extraction. It's still a technique that is used because it's basically more reliable in many ways. Like no risk of hallucination. That said, there are people doing pure LLM extraction, yes, with means you need filtering. And there are people using training neural networks to identify claims, yes. So again, tuned LLM, like this is the sentence, this is the claim structure I want you to be able to extract from that, and please learn that. So yeah, it's all research being done. This is not an easy topic, Michael.
No, I don't imagine it is, but I can see a potential future of my,
Oh yeah, no.
naive imagination of
it's
how
a close
good it's
future.
going to be.
It's a close future. I mean, people are like getting LLMs to extract claims from sentences is here. Getting them to do so reliably is another story, but getting them to do it is here. I was at a great conference where basically there was a researcher trying to go through some of these extractions, and there was a very funny moment. Like it started with, okay, here's a paragraph, give me an arc down representation. And that was Simon Buckingham's show. Give me an arc down representation. I think I pointed to that.
Yeah, I read that article, yeah.
Yeah, now he gave an extended talk about this Monday morning. And what was really funny in the extended talk is at some point, one of the arc down things that came out, it's like, where's that in the text? I don't see that in the original text. And oh, yeah, that's in paragraph 2, sentence 2, and it's not there at all. Like, and he even, kind of got to argue, and ChatGPT, no, I'm right, it's there. It was...
That's interesting. I read something about people using, I think, vector embedding or some type of comparison search to run that over what the LLM has responded with to verify before actually outputting to the user. So using like LangChain for like do this, then do that, then do this, and you can verify.
Sounds perfectly appropriate, yes.
But one of the features that I was seeing, and it was, I think in a recent call, like last week or the week before, Carl mentioned about creating a platform for creators, and whereby they can talk to their viewers and dialogue directly with the claims they're making in the video. So there's some kind of structured format underneath the video or something that shows here's what I'm saying and here's how they're connected. Now, if we could have an LLM take a YouTube transcript and create that for us to then show the creator, like, look, here's what this platform could do for all of your videos, or 10 of your videos you show them. I see a path towards that, which is really
what is
intriguing.
What is clear for me is that whatever we do, we need to have a way for people to oversee and check and triple check. And this is why I'm so interested in, okay, what's the underlying data format that allows for contested knowledge, multiple interpretations, yada, yada, yada. Because Indra, by the way, went like basically when it does NLP extractions, it says, okay, here's a triple X tactic, here's a sentence I got it from, did I get it right? And you can check over things. And then biologists who, like, when normally they don't check every claim because that's ridiculous, it defeats the purpose. But if there's something, like biologists kind of know, hey, this one is weird, let me see what it got it from, and then they can recheck. So that's very important, having the ability for humans to double check at any moment. And for me, the notion of contested knowledge is fundamental, like saying, this is the claim, and this is, and including the interpretations. This is how I understood what was said, and this is how you understood what was said. And maybe the author is dead, right? Or maybe they're not part of the conversation, more likely. And if we understand different things, we want to have that conversation about what does this even mean? I mean, we had all these examples about, and I think that this is very important to get into common culture. Tim gave this excellent example about pandemic will cost more, sorry, a lockdown will have more economic cost than the human cost of the pandemic. And it's like, what the heck does that even mean, right? You could be a miser and think that $1 for 1,000 lives is too much money, or you could be totally ridiculous the other side and think we need to spend the whole economy to save one life, and both are absurd. And the too much, how much is too much, and what's your estimate of, and make that a testable statement. And there's an infinity, in this case, infinity many testable statements that could be made from that sentence, and that's why the sentence is meaningless. Like infinitely many non-overlapping testable statements. But what it's saying basically is, I estimate that the human cost will be between this and that, and the lockdown economic cost will be between this and that, and with a conversion factor of so much, which I certainly won't say anything about. I think this is too much, right? Or not enough, or whatever, or worth it, or not worth it. But that's a testable statement. You know, if you fall outside of these bounds, then you've said something meaningful. Well, who wants to be caught saying something meaningful that could be proven wrong? On the other hand, and this is really important, and that's why I'm saying this needs to be the common culture. What's the difference between an empty statement and a testable statement? And can we actually get people on record to make testable statements and call them when they're making vacuous statements?
Yeah, no, I agree. But I'm wondering, with the vast amount of content that's out there, we could probably find testable statements to put through this type of rigor to say, like, does the system allow for all the cases that whatever testable statement was made? How does it look?
Yeah,
and I'm wondering in bringing it back to the CDL and your database that you're working on, or database structure, would real world scenarios help you form opinions about how you're creating that database? Like, how would that
quite possibly. Right now I'm having enough trouble thinking about my little hypothetical test cases, but I do hope that at some point I'll solve that, and then I'll be able to see, okay, how well does it deal with real world data? But a lot of real world data will be at least being able to say this meaningless statement could be interpreted as this or that testable statement, and is that what is meant, and who believes in that interpretation? And that makes it interesting, and because then we can ask questions about dog whistles, for example. How many?
I think, yeah, I agree, and I think if we found a way to take already existing data that someone is really passionate about and put it into a format that fits your system, you would have real users that would comment on yes or no or whatever, and filter out those dog whistles.
That is totally a goal, yes. And so, yeah, definitely, I'll try to keep you posted on the evolution of this. I'm still working on the data model. That's what I was spending. I spent a lot of time. It's been a while because I've been busy with society library stuff. Still am, but I decided, no. Actually, at this point, some of those puzzles are blocking me even for SL stuff. So I spent some time rethinking about data structures and database models this morning.
I saw a notification in the Slack about you and Jamie giving a presentation or something.
That was the Monday conference. We both were present. She presented Society Library. I presented the work with SenseCraft. I might have helped her, but it didn't happen as such. She decided to go alone, but she's also presenting some of the work I'm doing for her as such. So that's why my name was there, I guess. And also I got her invited to the conference. But yeah, I presented the work I'm doing with Jack on SenseCraft.
That's awesome. Are either of those recorded and or public?
I haven't heard about the recordings yet. I hope they are public when they are. It was recorded. When I receive the link, I'll see whether it's public, and in which case, yes, it was a great conference, and I totally invite you. There was a fascinating studies of we're way beyond time. There was a guy who did a lot of action research on getting people to interact with argument platforms and trying to, you know, how do you, like, in academia has its own ideas of p-values and how to what's a good strict text to show that the platform is useful. And if it, then you have to get your people on board and pay them to participate, and it's a mess. There's so many people who want to do this stuff, but they won't want to do it with pure boring control group. So you have to get them involved in the experimentation design. So the experimentation, even the control group's interesting in some way, or there's ways that everybody can participate so that they really want to get involved in testing the platform. There was a great methodology talk. I'll, as soon as I have at least slides and stuff, what I should give you is the conference site, because I'm sure a lot of this will be posted there.
I think it's linked in the Slack notification. Yeah.
Yes, I may have done that. Yes.
Events.kmi.
Yeah, that's the one.
Well, yeah, if you ever get any more materials from that, I would love to see them. That would be awesome. Thank you.
Sure. So
similarly with the knowledge graph conference, but I tried to do some research on that. It doesn't look like those go public, but
there's some on YouTube, but not everything. But there's a YouTube channel which has some material. It's easy enough to find, or I could look.
Yeah, there was like 2 from this conference. Maybe they'll post more. That would be nice.
I think they will.
I subscribe
time.
to it, so we'll see.
Good. Okay, good. Okay, I think it's been over an hour.
Cool. Well, we'll see you next week then.
See you next week.
Yeah.